Hey everyone, welcome back to the Bay State Golf Podcast. I am your host, Sean Melia. Today's podcast, we are going to go through 5 golf courses this summer. I'm hoping to play, return to. They're golf courses I played before 2020 when I started this quest, but I've yet to check it off since I started this quest to play every course in Massachusetts. So I picked out 5 public courses that I am looking forward to going and playing, that I have already played in my past golfing life. Before we get to that, I just want to make a quick call to subscribe to this podcast, whether you're listening to it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. You might be watching it on YouTube. You could just subscribe to that channel too. I try to come up with some topics that allow me to have some pictures and video in as well. So you can go and watch on YouTube and catch me there. Please subscribe wherever you're listening and watching. That is very helpful. Give it a thumbs up. Give me a review, rating, all those good things. And then one other quick plug, just because it's all kind of packaged in one place, everything else that I'd want to plug, please go subscribe, read my weekly newsletter. It is baystategolf.beehiiv.com. Beehiiv is BEEHIIV.com. You can read what I write. I try to write twice a week and pull together everything I've done from the week, whether it's stuff I've written for amateurgolf.com, things I've written or podcasted for New England Golf Journal, things I've done on my own, golf courses I've played, just trying to put it all in one place for people to get on a Friday. And I've also kind of mixed in a midweek newsletter post as well. So if you want those in your inbox, where you have to go and find it every week, you can subscribe and those will show up in your email twice a week. Other than that, just thanks for supporting me and this podcast and my quest. I am looking forward to getting out and checking off some golf courses. It's been kind of a funny spring, and between the rain and the just funny weather and just trying to find some time to play. I actually haven't checked off a new golf course yet this spring, and hoping to do that in the very near future and get running and play some new places. And that's what I wanted to talk about today. So let's get into my 5 courses that I have played in the past. Some I've played only once, some I've played a handful of times, but ones that I'm looking forward to getting out and playing over the course of this year. Okay, the first course, in no particular order here, Redtail. Redtail is a place that's close to where I grew up. It was the place that was a little bit of a treat to go play when I was a kid, a junior golfer. Even as an adult, it's somewhere that I always liked going and playing. It was difficult, good holes, usually in good shape. I have heard recently, and this is why I haven't really played it yet, that it's not in the greatest shape and the price hasn't come down. I know they've been doing a lot of work just on the golf course in general and working on the driving range and the clubhouse. And I think the golf course maybe took a little bit of a back seat. That might not be completely fair, but that's what I've heard, just as far as conditioning and that kind of stuff, that you would like to see Redtail in mint condition, because it's a golf course that when it's humming and it's fast and it's in good shape, is definitely a really good challenge and a blast to play. So that's the first one. The last time I played Redtail was in 2019, and I've written about this round. Kind of another reason it's just been on the back burner is I played with my friend Elliot and his dad, and it was just about this time in 2019. It was the very end of April, and in just a horrible circumstance, it was actually the last round that I ever played with Elliot's dad, who passed away like 3 days after we played Redtail. So it's a place that I'm trying to pick the right time to go. I want to do this properly, because it's going to be a pretty emotional round. Rob was a good friend of mine, even though he was the father of one of my closest friends. Played a lot of golf with Rob, and played a lot of golf with Rob and my dad and Elliot over the years. So I was kind of a really tough little stretch of losing him, and just haven't really felt ready to go back. Would like to do it with Elliot as well. So, there's some nostalgia there behind why I haven't gone back. And I want to get it right. I want to do it properly, and remember Rob when we do go back and play. So Red Tail is one I'm looking forward to going and playing. I'm hoping it's this year. I'm hoping Elliot will join me. But in some ways, it's not until he's ready that I'll go back, because I think it would be a nice way to return to that golf course and remember his dad. Number 2 on the list is a golf course I've only walked, but I've seen it. So this one, I'm using a little bit of creative license here. Miacomet on Nantucket. I caddied in the U.S. Mid-Am in 2021 when it was on Nantucket. They played Miacomet and they played Sankaty Head. Miacomet was the host course. So after the first 2 rounds, when they cut to match play, everything else was played at Sankaty. Miacomet was incredible, just from the shape it was in, the design. It was really hard. Got to watch some very good golfers play the golf course, which was also really great. And just a golf course I'm looking forward to going and playing. It is a boatload of cash to play it, unless you play it on the shoulder season. And it is definitely a course that, if you just plopped it on the mainland, it would be very popular. And probably, I think it already is one of the best public courses in the state, but people forget about it because it's on Nantucket. So it doesn't always come up in conversation right away, but it is outstanding. And I'm hoping to hop on a ferry at some point, maybe during the shoulder season when it's like $70 to play versus, upwards of beyond $200 to play it in prime peak summer season out on Nantucket. But Miacomet is absolutely a golf course I'm looking forward to going and playing, and is definitely on my short list, my bucket list. Number 3 on this list is Crump'n Fox. I've said this about Crump'n Fox before when I've talked to some guests on the podcast. Nick Eliopoulos, we talked about a little bit. This is a golf course that kind of spurred some of this idea for the quest. I was reading a couple different books about golf during COVID, especially through the winter. I read a few Tom Coyne books. I had read a course called Ireland years ago, and a course called America came out in May of 2020, and I think it was 2020. Came out around that time. I had also read his Paper Tiger, another great book. And I also read Range Bucket List by James Dodson. Just a bunch of books about guys who have, who are returning to goals they might have had as a kid in James Dodson's case, or in Tom Coyne's case, just came up with these incredible adventures that he wanted to go and play golf. And as I was reading those, I was thinking about in the fall of 2019, I was newly not teaching. I had a kind of a fall to go on little weekday trips and play golf if I had the time. And I had a little bit of time. So Crump'n Fox was one of those places. I went out. I wanted to go play Taconic and Crump'n Fox on a kind of double dip 36-hole day. The weather never turned out for me to do that. And late in October, the days were shorter. And I went out and played Crump'n Fox for the first and only time. And I went by myself. I think I got paired with 2 guys who were in town for a UMass Amherst convention, and they loved it so much that they always try to play it when they're in the area. And it's just a really solid golf course. I found the back 9 just delightful. Just a really good set of holes. I can't remember the exact numbers, which I know isn't great, but this was 2019, so we're talking 5 years ago, just about at this point. But there's a par 3 over water. There's a great par 5 right before it, where you kind of play downhill, down then between some trees, and then to a really cool green. The closing stretch, the 10th hole is another, like, the green site is amazing. So Crump'n Fox, definitely a place that just made me realize I can go and see a golf course that's, halfway across the state in a day. And that kind of stuck with me over the course of the winter, and then COVID hitting and us not being able to play golf. And that's one of the reasons I'm looking forward to going back to Crump'n Fox. It's definitely a place that sparked this. I took a couple pictures of the golf course, so I was starting to kind of mess around with just taking pictures and trying to capture the golf course as I'm playing it as well. So Crump'n Fox is absolutely one of the places I am very much looking forward to getting back and playing. Another one out west that I am looking forward to playing is the Ranch. I played the Ranch, man, probably like 2017, 2018. I met my friend Dean, who lives in New Jersey. He had some work in Connecticut, and it was kind of a nice halfway point from his work in Connecticut. He was staying there for a couple nights. So I drove out. It's a little bit longer of a drive than it looks on a map. You're just you get off the highway and you've got to do a lot of weaving and wandering through, small, slower roads and back roads and that kind of stuff. But it is another really, really good golf course. And the thing that struck me about it was just, it is on some severe land. And a lot of golf courses, when you go and they have huge hills and big places and big elevation changes, the clubhouse is usually at the top of that property. So you're driving uphill to the clubhouse, and then everything kind of plays down. At the Ranch, you are at almost the lowest point of the golf course when you're in the clubhouse on the driving range, and playing the first few holes. You're just kind of playing along the flat parts of the land. And then you start climbing slowly, and then you get to a point where you're hitting way downhill, and the elevation changes are really great. And I just found that kind of an interesting dynamic where there's so many golf courses you play where you feel like you drive up to the clubhouse to then play down away from the clubhouse and then play back up. Haverhill is one. That's a private golf course, but one where you play way downhill on your first tee shot. You're climbing way uphill on the 9th hole. You're going way downhill on the 10th hole, and you're climbing way back uphill on the 18th. And the clubhouse is just on the top of the hill. And that's completely fine. I think that's kind of the way a lot of golf courses build. No idea if the Ranch just couldn't build a clubhouse up near the top of the peak of the property. But it makes the golf course very interesting and very different because you are playing way uphill and way downhill, and the clubhouse is at the bottom. So the Ranch, absolutely another place out west I am looking to go. So I've got kind of a Metro West area. I've got 2 courses out west in Crump'n Fox and the Ranch. I've got a course on the islands. And then the last one I'm putting on here, it's got 2 courses. I just kind of half sputtered it out, is Pine Hills. And Pine Hills is on this list not because I'm super excited to go play Pine Hills. I am fascinated by the amount of love and affection that this golf course gets from so many people. I have played Pine Hills a fair amount of times. Haven't played it since I started the quest. I've purposefully just not gone to play it because it feels like a somewhat low-hanging fruit, right? I live in Boston. If I pick the right time of day, the right weekday, I could get down and play both, and I could drive down there pretty quickly. The last time I played one of the golf courses, I do know it was 2018, and I drove down. I got the very first tee time off, drove a cart. I think I played in 2.5 hours, and I did that because I had to be back in time to catch a flight. It was my first wedding anniversary. We were going on a trip later that night. So I just woke up super early, played 18 holes, and drove home. But Pine Hills is, you have the member for a day stuff, which I understand. You get people who grab your clubs. You finish your round and your clubs get wiped down. You have a great range with free golf balls. You have a really good practice area too, which I would, if you live down in that area, and if I lived down in that area, I would certainly try to just take advantage of a good range, a good short game area, a massive putting green. Like, that facility is really good. And that is not an argument I would be willing to have with anybody who, I cannot agree with anyone more if they're saying the facilities are great. You are absolutely right. Clubhouse is good. Food is good. Going down for 36 holes, I've done that. That's fun. But just as far as the golf courses get just a lot of attention for, in my mind, being fine. They're good. They're in good shape. It feels like it's just that kind of standard. We got to build some golf holes, and we have this land, and it's late 1900s, and we got to turn it into kind of a member for a day kind of feel. So they nailed that part. I just don't know how great the golf courses are as far as public golf courses. And on this list that I just named, which are, some of the primo golf courses, I don't know if it holds up against any of them. Maybe Redtail, but Miacomet blows it away. Crump'n Fox is a better golf course. The Ranch is a better golf course. I think Redtail, when it's in really good shape, is a better golf course. And George Wright, I would say, is better. I think there's a lot of better public golf. There might not be a lot of better public golf experiences. And if that's what you're looking for, and if that's why it comes up in people's lists, that's great. A couple of weeks ago, I posed a question on Instagram just asking, what are some of the most interesting, best putting greens in the state of Massachusetts that are public? And I specifically said, I don't want to know about conditions. I just want to know about in just kind of the design of the greens. They could be in terrible shape, but when you're putting them, they're at least interesting. Or when you're hitting shots into them, they make you think. Pine Hills was not mentioned, and hundreds of people responded, and it was not mentioned, which I think says something. And I was partly glad that it didn't come up for that reason, because in the back of my mind, it just doesn't hold up as a really good golf course. I also don't love that you have to drive a cart, and so you're kind of driving from green uphill to tees. There's a lot of kind of repetitive features to Pine Hills. So that's why it's on this list, because I am looking forward to going back and seeing it and kind of giving it my new set of eyes and looking at it. I know I'm going in cynical, which, if you know me, might be not much of a surprise. But as far as just a golf course, if I can see Redtail and Miacomet and Crump'n Fox and the Ranch and Pine Hills all this year, I will no doubt play George Wright and Franklin Park this year. I'm already playing Franklin Park in a Mass Am qualifier, so I know I'm playing there. Another course I love that's good public golf. If I can see all of those and Pine Hills kind of in that package, I think it'll be a worthwhile summer, and it will be a good way to maybe measure up and figure out, like, am I right about Pine Hills or am I wrong about Pine Hills? Because I'm still willing to go play it and think, like, I think I was a little bit hard on it from my past experiences, and maybe it's gotten better. Maybe it's in better shape. Maybe they've made some changes to it. So Pine Hills is one I'm just really interested to go play the Jones and the Nicholas. I'd love to do it all in one day. But that's kind of where I'm at. So Redtail, Miacomet, Crump'n Fox, the Ranch, and Pine Hills are 5/6 golf courses, because Pine Hills has 2, that I am looking forward to playing, that I have already played in the past before the Quest. That was the requirement for this list. Maybe in a couple of weeks I'll come up with my wish list of golf courses I have never played that are public that I'm looking forward to going and playing. Obviously, private golf courses are always fun to make bucket lists for, but those start to feel to me like they're asking for invites. So I'm trying to stick with public golf courses that I can hop online and make a tee time and carve out some time during the week to go play. So that's my list. That's kind of the first part of this podcast. The second part is going to be a little bit different. I wanted to share my writing with you from this week's Midweek newsletter. So on Fridays, I kind of wrap up the week. I put together my favorites from the week. I'll write, I always write a little essay at the top, but these midweek posts that I've been doing are a little bit more maybe like history in some cases, might touch on some architecture stuff in other weeks. In the 3 weeks that I've been doing this, I wrote about Bobby Jones and his connection to Franklin Park, which felt nice with the Masters coming up. When I wrote it, obviously the Masters is now past. And then the next week I wrote about Henry Picard, who was a Plymouth, Mass resident, grew up playing caddying at Plymouth Country Club. And he went on to win the 1938 Masters, and he won the 1939 PGA Championship. He beat Byron Nelson in the final match when the PGA Championship was match play. So I wrote about him, dug up some news clippings, did a little research on him, and that's kind of what I'm trying to do with these midweek posts. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, if you're interested in hearing a little bit about golf courses that have had some work done to them, I'm kind of poking around on talking to some people about some of the golf courses that have had a lot of work done, a ton of work done, and writing a little bit about those. And then obviously as the summer and the spring gets rolling, writing about some of the golf courses in more detail that I've played. Maybe I've learned some stories. And this week's that I wrote, that I posted on Wednesday, if you're listening to this on Friday, but I posted it on Wednesday, on April 17th. Posted it just before I finished my taxes. And I thought I'd read it out loud, just to maybe give you a taste if you have never visited my website or aren't a subscriber to the newsletter, and maybe it piques your interest. So this is an article, a post called "Donuts and Coffee at George Wright: A Story of the Great Depression." Long before the grilled hot dog brought joy to golfers at George Wright, a family sold coffee and donuts in the 1930s as the course was being built. It's how Don Forbes' grandparents kept the house they built in Hyde Park during the Great Depression. When Donald Ross designed the course in the late 1920s, George Wright was meant to be a private golf course. The 1920s was a time of opulence, without any sign that the bubble was about to explode and send the country into economic panic. That panic left George Wright in limbo. The work to excavate rocks from the land was costly, making George Wright's $1 million price tag one of the most expensive courses to build at the time. Eventually, the course was built after Boston's DPW purchased it and finished the project. It opened on April 23rd, 1938. What was a loss for the city's upper crust became a boon for public golf in the city. I discovered Don Forbes' story 3 years ago. In the afterglow of the first double dip, where I played Franklin Park and George Wright on the same day, one of the guys in the group, Samson, sent our text chain a screen grab of a George Wright course review. It wasn't so much a review as a walk down memory lane. The reviewer wrote that his family sold coffee and donuts to the men building the course during the Great Depression. The money they earned helped them keep their house across the street from George Wright. He added that he caddied at the course in the 1940s. The most important bit of information came at the end of the review. The reviewer left his name and email address. On a whim, I sent an email to Don Forbes. The review was about a year old, and having done the math on his age, I wasn't sure I would actually hear back from Don. I had a response in my inbox within 8 hours. He wrote, "Sure, I love to talk about my time at George Wright. It would be nice to have you visit, but if that is a big problem, I am sure I can do it by email or phone. Think of questions you would like to ask." He signed off and included his home address. A trusting fellow, to be sure. Not only was Don trusting, but he was also responsive. Before I could even respond to his initial email, he had written another, which was 7 paragraphs about growing up in Hyde Park. After a few more emails back and forth, we found a time to meet at his house in the Massachusetts suburbs and have lunch with Don and his wife, Diane. I wasn't entirely sure what would come from this lunchtime visit with Don and Diane. I was hopeful to hear stories about pre-war golf and the building of the golf course, and funny stories about caddying. When I met Don, I was struck by his imposing figure. He was tall and broad-shouldered, the human version of George Wright's clubhouse. He walked with a noticeable limp. His knees gave him a hard time. Why wouldn't they? Don is 88 years old. The house's walls were adorned with pictures of family and some of Don's beloved dogs from the past. Dobermans seemed to be his breed of choice. He lovingly called them his Dobies. When we sat down at the kitchen table, I could tell Don was fixing for some lunch. As promised, Diane took out some sandwiches, and for the most part, they went uneaten for the first hour of my visit. The only thing Don seemed more excited about than the food was to talk about growing up in Hyde Park. Don grew up in a house his grandfather built in 1927. His grandparents lived upstairs, and he lived downstairs with his parents and sister. Throughout the Great Depression, they lived in constant fear of losing the house. His enterprising grandparents find a way to make money to keep their house. However, if the value of the house fell below the mortgage, the bank could quickly snatch it up. As he munched on his sandwich, he told me the story. Quote, "My grandfather, father, and uncle would scour the golf course on weekends for empty whiskey bottles that my grandmother would sterilize on the big stove. She would make dozens of donuts and early in the morning make gallons of coffee. The menfolk would carry the stuff on their backs to the golf course and sell the coffee and donuts to the WPA workers. Those donut and coffee sales saved the house, as the men in our family were all jobless at the time." End quote. Forbes had his own bit of history with the golf course, too. When World War II ended, he started caddying at age 13. He'd carry 2 bags in the morning and then again in the afternoon. The caddy fee? $2 a bag, and usually a $1 tip. Don would head home with $10 in his pocket after 36 holes and 4 bags. The bags weren't the big monsters they are today, he said. Sometimes his pockets might have been a little lighter, as the caddies would kill time with some low-stakes gambling while waiting for loops. Quote, "If I lost 20 cents, it would be a big deal," Don said with a laugh. In order to make a bit of extra money, Don had a few other jobs around the course. Some were sanctioned, and one wasn't. He would shag golf balls for the pro during lessons in the evening. He'd stand and chase balls down as they were hit. Quote, "I'd use a baseball glove to try and catch them," Don said. He'd also work at a small food stand just past the 4th green, where the 5th and 7th tee boxes are. The World War II veterans set that up, and Don remembers them bringing him out there in the morning and picking him up at the end of the day. The first rendition of a beverage cart. On the not-so-legal side of things, Don and his friends would sell golf balls they'd find on the course. However, this took money out of the head pro's pocket, as he did the same thing and depended on that extra bit of income. A motorcycle cop named Bill Hackett was assigned to the course. He chased them off as they scoured for golf balls. Quote, "It was all in fun," Don said. "He loved chasing us on his motorcycle all over the place. He knew who we were." Monday was caddy day, and Don would go and play the course. Tuesdays were blocked off for women. In Don's memory, it was the only day he saw women on the course. He wasn't entirely sure if they weren't allowed during the other days of the week, or if they just preferred to use the time the course provided them. One stunning memory Don shared involved a caddy dying on the golf course. Charlie Sullivan was struck by a ball on the 3rd hole. His father had been killed in World War II, and Don said he often thought about Charlie's mother, who lost her husband and then her only child. I searched for any story about Charlie, but couldn't find anything in any old newspapers. The clubhouse would also host dances, and Don collected coats for the attendees. Dawn and Diane were interested in getting married at George Wright in the 1980s, but the course doesn't have functions there anymore. In the winter, the course was still a popular place to gather. Dawn would skate on the pond between the 12th and 13th holes. They even flooded the first and second fairways to create a huge ice skating rink in the winter. But the course got too soggy in the springtime, so they flooded the parking lot instead. A toboggan run was also built. Dawn remembers his mom breaking her leg on that toboggan run. Quite a far cry from the public course that was intended for that land. Even as Dawn grew up, George Wright remained in his life. Quote, "During the 70s, I worked in Framingham and was staying with my parents. I would get up at the crack of dawn and play 9 holes before I went to work. I would stop on the way out to pay and would be waved off. Nice people," he said. Living about an hour from Boston starting in the 1980s, Dawn didn't get out to George Wright anymore. Golf faded away as family and work became the priority. He worked on the railroad, which was another interest that was sparked as a child in that house in Hyde Park. He recalled watching the commuter and freight trains from his window. However, in early 2021, Dawn took a trip out to the old neighborhood and checked out the golf course. Quote, "My wife and I were treated like royalty. They didn't expect a guy who had caddied there 75 years ago to show up," he said. "It was a great day." The head pro, Scott Allen, took them around in a golf cart to show them the course, a walk down memory lane to be sure. The trees stood out to Dawn the most during the visit. He recalled that it was hard to lose a ball back in the 1940s, but that's not the case anymore at George Wright. Over the course of my 90-minute visit with Dawn and Diane, we wandered about in conversation, which was lovely. However, Dawn would always perk up when the conversation returned to George Wright and the different experiences he had there. Quote, "Having grown up at that golf course, it was a big part of my early teen years," Dawn said. From his Swedish grandmother sterilizing whiskey bottles that his grandfather collected, to selling donuts and coffee, to shagging golf balls with a baseball glove, to caddying for $2 a bag, to collecting coats at dances in the Regal Clubhouse, George Wright certainly shaped Dawn Forbes' early life. As I headed home, I was grateful Dawn and Diane had opened their home to me for the afternoon, filling me with food and stories about a golf course that highlighted a family's ingenuity in the face of hardship during one of the most trying decades of our country's history. And that's it for today's podcast. Thanks for listening. Thanks for subscribing. Go subscribe to my newsletter, please. BayStateGolf.com. I'm sorry, BayStateGolf.beehive.com. BEEHIIV.com. And we will see you all next week.